can please stand and we'll do the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let us meditate on the glorious effulgence of that Supreme Being who created the universe. May she enlighten our hearts and direct our understanding. Please be seated. Okay, hi everyone. So it's lovely to see everybody after the summer holidays, as well as some new faces. So welcome everyone. Once upon a time, there were two sages in ancient times, and both of these sages were very learned. They'd learned all the things about astronomy, about medicine, about philosophy, about the knowledge of God, and they were both having a discussion as to which kind of knowledge is the most superior. And they both came to the conclusion that the knowledge of God is the most superior, because the knowledge of God is all-encompassing. It covers every aspect of our lives, whereas other kinds of knowledge, like scientific knowledge, only covers a part of our lives or a partial aspect of our lives. So that this is the conclusion that they had come to. And that has been the long-standing belief for centuries and for millennia, is that religious knowledge somehow sees itself as being superior to other kinds of knowledge. In a way, religious knowledge somehow has looked down on other kinds of scientific and other secular knowledge. And that has been the long-standing belief, and there's always been a bit of a tension, a bit of a tussle between religious knowledge and scientific knowledge. But as we all know, times have changed, and over the last few hundred years, there have been tremendous developments in science, and it's getting greater and greater understanding of our universe. And the methodology of science is very rigorous, because every theory is tested to its limit, and it's only accepted if it passes all of those tests. And modern man has also started to change their mindset, because in the olden days, people were satisfied with believing whatever the priests told them to believe, believing whatever books told them to believe. But modern man has started to change their mindset. And they think, you know what, I think I start to prefer the endeavour of science, where I'm encouraged to think, rather than the endeavour of religion, where I'm just told to believe. And I don't want to believe because a group of priests tell me to believe, and I don't want to believe because a book tells me to believe. And I prefer the endeavour of science. So over the last few hundred years, things have really been changing. And in a way, religions, which have always been seen as being unquestioning and unquestionable, are somehow seem to now be on a bit of a losing wicket. And science seems to be gaining the upper hand. But people who love religion, they obviously don't want religion to fall apart and crumble. So what can we do to save religion? Well, the only thing that we really can do to save religion is to also now finally put religion under the microscope of logic and reason and see if it makes sense to us rationally. And some people who love religion, they might get worried about doing this. They say, you know, this is the religion that I love. This is the religion that my forefathers and ancestors have loved and adored for centuries. I'm worried that if I put it under the microscope of logic and reason, is it all going to crumble away? Is it all going to fall apart? But in a way, we kind of have to take this step at the moment, because if we don't do something, there is a real threat to religion, there is a real risk to religion that it may just crumble away anyway. And if we do put it under the spotlight, we have to be brave enough to expect the results that possibly we find that religion is just a bundle of superstitions. Perhaps there's nothing to it anyway. We have to be prepared to take that leap. But suppose if it does begin to make sense to us, if we can rationalize it, then religion comes onto a firmer footing and it can become stronger and survive the challenge of science. Okay, so what is the first condition of logic that we can put religion under? The first condition of logic is that the particular can be explained through the general through the more general, until we come to the universal. And by that I mean, for example, when Newton saw an apple fall from a tree, he was concerned. He said, what does this mean? Why is an apple falling from a tree? But when he was able to fit this particular circumstance into a more general occurrence, then he realized that, oh, actually, all apples fall from trees. It somehow gives you a bit of peace of mind that this isn't some strange occurrence. This is something that happens all over the world. And not only that, he was then able to put it into an even more general box, saying not just apples that fall, but all objects from a height seem to fall. Let me put this into a category. Let me call it a law and call it the law of gravity. And actually, a lot of what science does is putting things into boxes, trying to classify things, to clarify things in our mind. Because the reality of it is, our human mind is full of little pigeonholes. And once we're able to fit a particular thing into a pigeonhole, we say that it makes sense to us. And for example, if you look at biology, a big part of biology is the classification of living things. And there's a large part of it which says, oh, you know, there is a certain group of animals which have certain characteristics. Let's call them mammals. There's a certain group which we call reptiles. There's a certain group we call birds. So it's all about putting things into boxes which make sense to us. And actually, yes, so let's try and generalize it more and more until we come to a universal understanding. So yes, for example, biology is the classification of living things. But there is so much more to this world and this universe than just living things. We have lots of non-living things as well. We've got mountains and buildings and furniture, and going on beyond that, we've got planets and moons and stars and galaxies. So what category can we put them under? We can put them under the category of non-living things. So that makes logical sense to us, for example, that look, the whole of this universe, the entirety of this universe is comprised of two boxes, living things and non-living things. And that makes sense to us. What is the next box? How can we universalize it even more? What is the next box that we can put all of these things into? And it's difficult. What is the common ground between living things and non-living things? Actually, there is a very interesting word, and it fits perfectly. It describes both living things and non-living things. And that word is they all exist. So yes, that makes sense to us. The moon exists. Yes, that makes logical sense to us. Bird exists. Yes. Tree exists. Human being exists. Everything in the entirety of this universe we can say exists. And that makes logical sense to us. Okay, so that's the first sort of condition of logic, is that we have to be able to fit into lots and lots of boxes, fit this universe into lots of boxes until we come to a universal understanding. So that's the first condition. What's the second condition of logic? The second condition is that the explanation for something must come from inside and not outside. By that I mean, for example, suppose there is a thunderstorm. Rather than thinking, oh, there is a god of thunder who is responsible for this thunderstorm, it makes more logical sense for us to say, oh, it's because there is an interaction between water molecules and air molecules under certain conditions which then produce a thunderstorm. That makes so much more sense to us. Suppose there is a chemical reaction between two elements. Rather than thinking, oh, there's some mystical being who is responsible for causing this puff of smoke, it makes more sense for us to understand that actually it's the nature of these two chemicals to interact in this way under these conditions. So the explanation for something must come from inside and not outside. That's what makes more sense to us. So that's one of the second conditions of logic. And going further, actually what we find is that evolution makes more sense to us than creation. Because creation implies that there is an external being called God who somehow deems his magic wand and suddenly produces thousands of species of birds, thousands of species of plants and animals and mammals. Whereas evolution makes more logical sense to us because we understand that it is the nature of living things to adapt to their environment, and that is the reason why we have hundreds and thousands of species of all sorts of living things. So there we have it. There are the two conditions of logic. The particular can be explained through the general, and that the explanation for something must come from inside and not outside. Okay, so there we have it. Those are the things that make sense to us rationally and logically. Now comes the test. Can we put religion under the same spotlight? Does it fit? And we are obviously in the Hindu class, so let's turn to Hinduism. The thing is, when we turn to Hinduism, the first thing that sort of pops into our mind is all the hundreds and thousands of gods and goddesses that we have. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave those gods and goddesses to the side for the moment. We will come back to them later on. What we're going to do first is delve into the heart of Hindu philosophy and see if we can meet these two challenges. Okay, so the first one was the particular can be explained through the general until we come to the universal. Well, actually, what Hindu philosophy says is that there is something which is universal, which is underpinning to the entirety of this universe. It's shapeless, it's formless, but it's the underpinning to the entirety of this universe. It's non-material, and we call it Brahman. So there we have it. The particular can be explained through the general, but then it's very difficult for us to get our head around a very subtle concept as to what is this Brahman. It's shapeless, it's formless, it's colourless, it's not made of matter. So what is it? How can we describe it? The closest description we have for Brahman is that it is of the nature of existence. The whole underpinning to this universe is existence. Hang on there, ding. That's exactly what science and logic was showing us, is that everything in this entire universe, living things and non-living things, all exist. And Hindu philosophy is also showing us that the underpinning to the entirety of this universe is something called Brahman, which is of the nature of existence. So we can see how scientific knowledge and ancient Hindu philosophy coalesce together so beautifully. So that's the first condition. And actually what we find is that science over and over again, what science is doing over and over again, is trying to find unity in diversity. By trying to put things into boxes, we're trying to find the common ground, the highest sort of common factor in everything, so we can put things into boxes. And actually what we find over and over and over again is science is showing this unity in the world around us. Physically, we are all deeply interconnected. For example, a number of complex elements have come together to create a human body. When our human body dies, all of those elements are returned back to nature and again used in the creation of other living things. And all of us are made out of recycled materials. All the physical elements are being recycled over and over again. So physically, we are all deeply interconnected. Mentally, too, we are all deeply interconnected. It's impossible for a human being to have thoughts in isolation. Every thought you have is influenced by, for example, you switch on the TV, you switch on the radio, you speak to your family and your friends. Those thoughts enter your mind. And as soon as you open your mouth, your thoughts enter the minds of others. So mentally, we are also all deeply connected. And it goes without saying that spiritually, too, we are all deeply interconnected. So to the person who thinks he's got a lot of wealth and power and prestige, this is a humble reminder to say, you know what? You may have wealth and power and prestige at the moment, but remember, it's never going to last forever. The only thing that's going to last forever is this oneness that we have with everything. We are all part of this infinite ocean of existence. We appear and disappear in one body, and we appear and disappear again in another body through this process of reincarnation. We are all in a state of flux, but underneath this state of flux is this infinite, immovable, unchanging Brahman. And that is the conclusion of Hindu philosophy, is when you can declare, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. So that's the first condition of logic. The second condition that we are talking about is that the explanation of something must come from inside and not outside. Well, again, that fits beautifully with Hindu philosophy, because what we say is that the underpinning to the entire universe is this Brahman, and there is nothing else. There is no room for an external god to ding his magic wand and create the universe. It is of the nature of this universe to behave in the way that it does. It's in the nature of water to flow. It's in the nature of fire to burn. We understand that it's the nature of these things to behave in certain ways under certain conditions. So that also makes a tremendous amount of sense. Okay, so this is the Hindu philosophy that not a lot of people are aware of. The Hinduism that most people are aware of is, as we said, all these hundreds and thousands of gods and goddesses that we have. In fact, we have 330 million of them. So look, there looks like a huge discrepancy here. We're talking about Brahman, the underpinning to the entirety of this universe, and we've got all these gods and goddesses. How do we reconcile them? The way that we can reconcile them is, for example, if we sit down to meditate and we try and focus our minds on Brahman, for example, this formless, colourless, shapeless thing that we call existence, it's very, very difficult to do that. But if we personify this existence, if we personify this Brahman into the shape of a human being who looks beautiful and colourful, then we think, it's so much easier to now sit down and meditate and focus on a personality and build a relationship with that personality and make spiritual progress in that way. So what we say actually is that all of these different forms of gods and goddesses are different personifications of that same one existence, which is the underpinning to the entirety of this universe. And that is why this idea of pluralism comes so naturally for Hindus, because as soon as you enter a Hindu temple, it may, for example, be a Shiva temple or a Ram temple or a Krishna temple. Often when you go in, there'll be images of loads of other gods and goddesses in there as well. And there's no sort of infighting, Hanuman is better than Ganesh and Mother Goddess is better than your god, and fight, fight, fight. It's natural in our Hindu blood, in a way, to say, you know what, they are all expressions of the same divinity. There is no contradiction here. We personify God in the way that we find fit, in the way that suits us the best. I'll just end with a little story which I've done before. Once upon a time, there was a little boy learning about Hinduism from his teacher, and he was struggling to understand this concept, that how can this shapeless, formless Brahman be manifested in so many different ways? How can it be the same thing? And the teacher took out an ice mold which had lots of different shapes, square shapes, star shapes, heart shapes, whatever, and he filled the molds with water and froze them for an hour. And then he called his students again in an hour, and he popped out the mold, because obviously the water had frozen into different shapes. And he asked his student, what do you think? Do you think all of these shapes look different? And the student said, yes, of course they look different. But the teacher said, can't you see they are all made of the same thing? And that is essentially what we are all doing on our spiritual journey. We are all personifying the same formless Brahman into the shape that suits us the most. So there is no contradiction in terms, and actually what we find is all of these gods and goddesses we have in Hinduism are strengthened through going through this grilling process of rationality, because we find that they are just expressions of the same infinite spirit which we are all deeply connected with. And that's that. So just a bit of a run through, and I think we are safe to say that Hinduism has survived the test of rationality, and in a way it's wonderful to go through this thought process, because it strengthens the idea of religion and spirituality in our minds. It's not some airy-fairy made-up thing. There is some substance there. So yeah, does anyone have any questions or anything? We've got time for questions. Yes?
You mentioned how all gods are just like a form of Brahman, but a large part of Hinduism is about stories between interactions between different gods. So
yeah.
How do you explain that?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. So yes, of course, with all these gods and goddesses come all of these colourful stories we have. We have Brahma, who created the universe, Vishnu, who preserves, Shiva, who destroys. We've got so many interactions between gods and goddesses. And you think, what? Hang on, that doesn't make any sense with what we've just been discussing. But what we have to be very clear, and what we have to remember, is that all of these stories come under a category called mythology. They come under mythology. We understand that they are man-made stories, which we need in a way to help religion become colourful and interesting and exciting. Even today, in our current sort of culture, we have lots of, we can call mythology. We have Harry Potter, we've got Lord of the Rings, and we find them intriguing, we find them exciting. And that is why we have these stories, these wonderful, colourful stories of gods and goddesses within Hinduism. The important thing to remember is that if you throw that mythology under the spotlight of rationality, it's going to crumble. So we have to understand that let's leave it to the side. Let's understand it for what it is. It's colourful stories. We don't take it as being literally true. What we take to be literally true is the philosophy that we've just been discussing. And there is a real need for mythology, because if we just say, oh, Brahman, everybody just sit down and meditate on Brahman, it's incredibly boring. It's very, very difficult to get our minds around such an abstract concept. We need this tussle between the gods and goddesses. It makes religion colourful and interesting. And if you tell a little child, focus on Brahman, they're going to run away from religion to start with. If you tell them, oh, there's a story of Ram and Sita and there's a Ravan with 10 heads, they're like, wow, that looks really interesting. So actually it makes religion very colourful and exciting. Yes?
So you said that in Hinduism, all the gods are made of the same thing, which is Brahman. But you said that none of them are more important than the other.
Yes.
But most people in their, lots of Hindu people in their homes, they have these little temples, but they only have like 8 gods, not the other 300 million. So how would you explain that?
That's fine. I mean, it's not a criteria that every temple must contain every expression of gods and goddesses. They can pick and choose, because ultimately we will understand that they are the same thing anyway. So perhaps there isn't room, or perhaps, I think logistically, how are you going to fit 330 million different forms of gods into a temple? So in a sense, it's okay. They don't all have to be there, because we understand that they're all the same expressions of the same one. And every individual will have a personal preference. There'll be someone who says, I love Hanuman. There'll be somebody who says, I love Mother Goddess. And for them, that's the right path for them. But there is no need for conflict or tussle between them. Yes?
To say like what you were saying as well, at least in myself, that each family really has a patron,
yes,
or a matron,
yes,
of goddess that they have a temple, they dedicate an entire temple. Most traditionally, well, at least they own like a small temple.
Yeah.
They run like a prayer service for the specific gods.
Yes.
So some families, some gods are just more important just for them. So
yes,
because you can't worship 330 million and just be.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so but I think some gods are more important to some people.
Yes, of course. That's how it has to be, because how can all of us love 330 million gods? It's just not physically possible, mentally possible for us. So yes, you pick the god that suits you and you focus on that god, because if you just sort of get scattered all over the place, you're not going to make any progress. So pick one and stick to it. But at the same time, understand that other people are going to pick other ones, and that is okay as well. So you choose the one that suits you the best. And perhaps, you know what, you might think, none of the gods appeal to me, and that's okay. Perhaps I love music or art or science, and that's the way I want to understand the world. Because the interesting thing is, everyone thinks, religion is all about praying to God. But actually, the correct name for Hinduism is dharma. And dharma is actually, the question that it's trying to answer is, why are we here? What are we doing here? Let me try and make sense of my human condition. That is essentially what dharma is all about. And that is what we are doing through choosing a particular deity to love, or choose whatever spiritual endeavor you choose. It's all about trying to figure out who we are and why are we here. And that is essentially what dharma is all about. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, great questions. Any other questions? Well, okay, perfect. Right, so I guess we could end it there. And
free e-learning course in Hinduism. To register, please visit www.hindu-academy.com.
Talks on Hinduism. Sponsored by People Care. Encouraging caring for the elderly in their own homes. For more information, please visit peoplecare.com.